Okay, so a couple things we're going to do tonight. We kind of didn't go over Chapter 5 homework last week because you remember that spring break week we did a recorded lecture. I don't know how many people actually did the homework, so I'd like to do a Chapter 5 homework problem. That's project management, to make sure that we understand that and how to use that template. I think we did one in class last week, but I'd like to do another one just to make sure we understand what's going on there. I would like to also do a Chapter 6 homework problem, and I think I have up on the board, I'd like to do number 20, because I think it had a lot of the elements, all the elements involved there. It also dealt a little bit with probability, which maybe people were able to do and people weren't able to do, so we'll do number 20. We will start Chapter 7 today, and Chapter 7 is about forecasting, and I think I told you guys this last week, but forecasting, kind of like project management, is something that everyone does at some point in their life. You know, forecasting, this is called time series forecasting, so we're forecasting future values based on past values, because usually past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. So we look at what something has done over time and try to project that forward. So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, from Chapter 5, I don't know if we did any of the problems, and maybe we did. So if I did this one before, stop me. But I thought we should do maybe number 7 on page 313. Did we do that in one class? No, yes? Anyone remember the George Washington High School planning reunion? No? Okay. So I'm going to kind of do this quickly, but I kind of want to go through a couple things. Let's see if I can bring this up. This is on page 313, and okay, it says, George Washington High School is planning a reunion for the graduating class of 1975. The D'Onofrio twins, who are in charge of planning the entire event, have determined the following tasks. So this is called a precedence relationship chart. You know, if anyone has gone through any project management training, one of the things you do is, you know, determine all the activities. There's something called a work breakdown structure. Like, what do we have to do to have? What's part of this project? Everything that has to be done. Then it usually has to be done in some logical order, right? It has to be done in some order. So we call that determining the relationships, or the precedence relationships. And then part of the process is, hey, we know this needs done. You know, we need to go out and get estimates for the duration and also the cost, those kind of things. So what we're focusing on here is the time management aspect. But this is called a precedence relationship chart, and it has all those aspects. It has the activities, it has the relationships, and in this case, instead of just having one estimate, we have actually 3 estimates. We have a best case, a most likely case, and a worst case. Why? Why do we have 3 estimates for every activity or task? Why do we have 3 estimates? What's the goal there, Dylan?
Maybe just because you don't know exactly what is going to happen, or
yeah, we understand that, you know, most projects don't happen, you know, always according to plan, and there's some variability in there. So we want to build in it as a probability distribution, and the most famous probability distribution of all is the normal curve, where we have a mean and a standard deviation. The mean controls the average. Mean means average, right? The center, and the standard deviation controls how spread out it is. So we could say, hey, this is going to take 25 days with a standard deviation of 1.5 days, because that's how we talk about normal curves. But we don't think that way. Most people don't think that way. So we go from a human convention, and give me the most likely case, give me the best case, and give me the worst case, and we try to go to something like this, all right? So we go from the way we can communicate with humans to the math part. So the way this works, it's called the 3-time estimate approach, and it's also used for costing. To get the average, and we don't have to do this by hand, but what we do is we take the best case scenario, okay, which is usually A, okay, plus 4 times the most likely case scenario, plus the worst case scenario, and divide by 6. So what this is doing is saying, give 1/6 of the weight to the best case, 2/3 or 4/6 of the weight to the most likely case, and 1/6 of the weight to this one. So for every activity, that's what's happening. It's determining an average that way. The standard deviation kind of recognizes the spread. It says take the worst case minus the best case divided by 6. So I just want to show you this because, you know, sometimes you may do estimating of costs or something like that. And, you know, this is a common thing in the business world, to use what's called a 3-time estimate, 3-time or 3-cost estimate approach. So what we have up here is we ask the people, you know, exactly what's the best case scenario for this, the probable and the worst case scenario, and we calculate it out. So we have to go from here to some kind of tool. Now I think I've told you this before. We're going to use these Excel templates, which aren't the best tool, right? There's all kinds of project management software out there that does this behind the scene. Microsoft Project is one. There's Artemis, there's Dot Project, there's Open Workbench, there's several. You just Google free project management tools and you can find a whole bunch of them. But all these behind the scenes do this, okay? So we want to determine for this project, we want to determine the best case, you know, when's this project going to be done? We want to determine the critical path, the activities with no slack. And by building the variability into every task, we build in variability to the whole project. So now when I tell my boss, hey, it's going to be done in 100 days, you know, that's not, we're not going to say 100 days, we're going to say 100 days with a standard deviation of 10. So I'm going to tell my boss there's a 50% chance I'll be done in 100 days, 50% chance it's going to take longer than 100 days. And if my boss says, well, what's the odds you're done by, I don't know, maybe 120 days, I can say, well, you know, there's a 90% chance I'll be done within maybe 120 days, given the way it is right now. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead because I don't think it's fun to watch me enter in numbers in a spreadsheet. So I'm going to go to, we'll go to material by chapter, chapter 6. I'm sorry, we're on chapter 5. I got to go back. Chapter 5. And I'm going to go to, this is number 7, right? So 5, 7. So all right, so let's take a look at this. So what we would do is we would enter all of our activities in column A, and then we would use column C, D, and E for the 3-time estimates, just replicating that, bringing that over. The only thing that's a little bit tricky is those relationships. So the way I like to think about it, instead of predecessors and successors, is, you know, if we see like letter C in the book on page 313 says choose a site, immediate predecessor is B, which is determine a budget. So the way we read this is C waits on B to finish. D waits on B to finish. F waits on A to finish. And you'll see some of them have multiple relationships. For example, H, determine excess funds, waits on D, F, and G. So I have to enter all 3 of those separately. H waits on D, H waits on F, and H waits on G. Okay? So the way this template works, and like I said, this isn't the greatest tool in the world. There's software that's much better at this. But I'm using Solver, so I'm going to click Data, Solver, Solve, and it does some things over here. I keep the Solver solution. Nothing really changes. But I'm going to go to the Output tab, and I'm going to resolve and keep that. And here's what it tells me. Now, this is the results that I want to analyze. It says the project is done. So if we look at this as a project now, the project has a mean completion time of 88.5 days and a standard deviation of, what does that look like, 6.6 roughly? Okay, 6.6. So that's the average, and 6.6 is the standard deviation. A couple things I want to analyze. When's the earliest this project can be done? When's the earliest this project can be done? 88.5, right? That's the project completion time. What's the odds, though, that it's done under 88.5 days? because we're recognizing this thing has some variability to it, the probability it's done before 88.5 days is 50%, because that's symmetrical, it's right in the middle. The odds that it takes longer than 88.5 days is 50%. If I wanted to know other things, okay, what's the odds that it takes less than 100 days? Well, I'd put in 100, and it tells me 96%, right? So 100 is here. The odds that it gets done in 100 days and under is 96%. What if I were to ask you, what's the odds that it's going to take me longer than 100 days? And don't overthink this. What if I was going to ask you, if I asked you, what's the odds that it takes longer than 100 days? What's the answer? Don't overthink. 100%. No. 4%, right? If it's 96% of the time it's going to be done 100 days and less, then 4% of the time it'll take longer than that, right? It's complementary. It has to add to 100%. If I asked you for what is the critical path here? What is the critical path activities? The critical path activities are A, F, H, and I, okay? What activity has the most slack over here? Okay, order of the sweatshirts, it looks like, has 72 days of slack, okay? So as a project manager, those are the things I want to use, the things I want to know. What activities have no wiggle room or they'll impact the project? What activities have the most surplus and how much? Because it'll help me level resources. And I can also now give better estimations to my superior, like, hey, this is what I'm saying for the project, but that's a 50% chance it's done with that. So if you want to know something that I'm 98% comfortable with, I'll have to give you a higher value, and I'll tell you what that value is. It might be 102 days, okay? Because we have to recognize that baked into every undertaking like this, project like this, there is going to be variability. So this is more common than not, right? So any questions on that? So that's the important concepts from chapter 5. Let's look at chapter 6, okay? So I think the one that I chose that I'd like to do is number 20. And you guys may have others, but let's look at number 20. Okay, so Marriott Hotels is planning to build a new hotel property in a suburb of Portland, Oregon. The company is considering one of 4 sizes of hotels to construct: 120 rooms, 200 rooms, 260 rooms, or 320 rooms. Construction will take 1 year to complete. Profitability of the property will go to a great extent depend on whether an industrial park or a university is developed in the area. The following table gives the long-term present worth profit in hundreds of thousands based on the size of the hotel constructed and the development that could take place in the area. Marriott Management estimates that there's a 60% chance that an industrial park will be developed and a 30% chance that the university will be developed. The two developments are believed to be independent of each other. Determine the optimal size Marriott should construct based on the expected value criteria. So I'm going to do this 2 ways. Okay, the first way I'm going to look at it is under uncertainty. What is uncertainty? What is uncertainty? What's the condition of uncertainty? We can make decisions under the condition of uncertainty. What does that mean? Remember, there are 3 kind of conditions we make decisions under. Certainty, where we know what the hell is going to happen. Uncertainty, where we don't have any clue what's going to happen. And risk. What's the difference between uncertainty and risk? What's the difference between uncertainty and risk?
Risk is that you have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, risk is we're able to assign likelihood or probability to the future events, right? We don't know they're going to happen, but we're able to assess and say, hey, there's a 20% chance of this or 80% chance. We can't predict the future, but we can assess how likely the future is, okay? So that's the difference, okay? That's the difference between uncertainty and risk. So if we look at this, what are the decisions? What is the decision alternatives that I have up here? What are the decision alternatives I have here?
Room size?
Okay, right. The number of rooms of hotel. It says room size. This is a 120 room hotel, a 200 room hotel, or 260 or 320. Okay. What determines how good of a decision that was to build a small hotel or a big hotel? What does it say is the determining factor on how good of a hotel, how good of a decision was for the size of the hotel? What determines that? There's called states of nature, future states of nature that determine if that was a good decision or a bad decision. What are we looking at for future states of nature?
Depends what's built.
Okay, when we build, it depends on what other things are built, right? Because that drives traffic to our hotel, yes? So the two big things are, hey, an industrial park or a university. Those are the two big things, right? If both are built, hey, we should have built a big hotel, right? If neither are built, well, we probably should have built a small hotel. So we had someone come in and they said, hey, if we build a 120 room hotel and neither of those get built, this is in hundreds of thousands, so it'd be a $1.2 million profit to us. If we build 120 and and both get built, hey, that's a $3 million profit. But if we go big, 320, and none get built, hey, that's a negative $1 million project. If we build 320 and both happen, hey, that's a $6.5 million project. So those are the payoffs. If we do this and this happens, this is what we project as our payoff. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's just take a look at this, and I'm going to go back to the PC here. And this is 622. Uh, 620, thank you. So 620. Just going to get rid of that for now. So you guys know we have a template called decision template or decision payoff template that uses a payoff table. Okay, so in column A we enter the decision alternatives. In the columns there's the future states of nature, and then I just copied those payoffs there. So if I were very pessimistic or very pessimistic, I might use the maxim in. The maxim in says look across all of the payoffs, okay, all the decisions, and look at the worst case scenario, and then pick the best of the worst case scenario. Pick the maximum of all the minimums. So the minimum here would be, let's see, 12, 8, 3, and negative 10. So based on that, the highest number I said was 12. So it's telling us, the template does this for us, but if we're using the maximum in criteria, build a 120 room hotel, and our payoff is 1.2 million basically. Minimax regret is a little bit differently, okay? What we have to do, and if you do this by hand, what you have to do is build a complementary table or a mirror table that basically looks at every state of nature and says, hey, if nothing happens, if this happened, then what was the best thing to do? Well, we have 12, 8, 3, negative 10. I guess the best thing would have been to build 120. Now everything's based on that. We made 8 million, but we could have made 800,000, but we could have made 1.2 million. So that's 4 worth of regret. Okay, so you see how everything's based on that? And then minimax regret says pick the minimum of all the maximum regrets. And this one is build a 260 room hotel, and that has the minimum of the maximum regret is 1,700,000, which is what, 1.7 million, I guess. Maximax is very easy. It says, hey, go big or go home. Optimistic, aggressive, pick the biggest value. The biggest value there is at 65, so that's going to lead me to build the 320 room hotel. The principle of insufficient reasoning says, I don't know what the hell is going to happen. We're doing this under uncertainty, so let's just go neutral. I'm going to add up all the payoffs and figure out the one with the highest payoffs, okay? So I add them all up and then divide, it looks like it's dividing by 4. It looks like 260. So I use 4 different uncertainty criteria, yes, and I got 3 different answers. So basically what it looks like is maybe I could throw off the 200-room hotel. You know, I mean, no criteria is leaning me that way. But if I'm pessimistic, well, you know, if I'm focused on regret, then build the 260. If I'm focused more on just chaos, maybe build the 120. And if I'm aggressive, maybe build the big one, okay, the giant one. Now, what we try to do is uncertainty is no good because that's saying I have no clue what's going to happen. But a lot of times we try to do research and try to quantify. Like maybe we go out and say, you know, look, it seems like they're getting building permits for this. It seems like they're doing zoning just for this company. So we try to quantify the likelihood of these events because that can be a major decision. So that's what happened in the book here. It says, Marriott estimates that there's a 60% chance that the industrial park is built. So a 60% chance of the industrial park being built. And it looks like there is a 30% chance that the university will be built. Okay, so now this is no longer a decision under uncertainty because we have some knowledge or some probability of the likelihood of these events. This is a decision under what's called risk, right? You know, risk is when you have some knowledge about the probability. Like, you know, life insurance, that's a decision under risk, right? You know, likelihood it can be figured out, the likelihood you're going to die in the next 20 years, next 30 years. You play the lottery, that's a decision under risk. You know, anything like that, that's a decision under risk. So we need to figure out, and this might have been where you guys struggled a little bit, which that's fine. We need to figure out the probability of the 4 outcomes, because there's really 4 outcomes, okay? The 4 outcomes are neither get built, the industrial park only, the university only, or both. Well, these are independent events. So the best way to think about this is flipping a coin. And you look in the book, you have this. So what's the odds if I flip a coin? What's the odds when I flip a coin? One flip. What's the odds of getting heads and getting tails? Okay, so if we visualize that, you know, the probability of getting heads on the first flip is 50%, and the probability of getting tails on the first flip is 50%, right? Yes? That's the 2 paths we can take. Okay, after we flip the coin and we get heads, say we flip the coin a second time. What can happen on the second flip? Heads or tails. And what's the odds on this second flip we get heads? 50%. That's independent, means there's no relationship. Just because I got heads on this flip doesn't impact the probability I get heads on this flip, right? I know there's people that think that is the case, but that's not the case. And the same thing down here. The probability to get heads after I get tails is 50%. The probability to get tails after I get tails is 50%. So what this is called is a probability tree, and sometimes it's called a decision tree. And if we follow the paths on the tree, it ends 4 places. Because when I flip a coin, there's really 4 outcomes, right? When I flip a coin twice, I should say, there's 4 outcomes. This outcomes is I get heads and I get heads, so that's HH, right? This outcome is I get heads and then tails, that's HT. This outcome is TH, that's tails and then heads. And this outcome is tails, tails, right? Does that make sense? There's 4 paths, you know, so there's 4 combinations. Now, this is the part you may not have known. To find the odds of following this path as heads path, what I should do is multiply along the path. So heads times heads, 50% times 50% is 25%. Heads times tails, that's another 25%, 25%, 25%. So if I asked you what's the probability of getting 2 heads and 2 flips of a coin, it's 25%. 2 tails, 25%. What if I ask you what's the odds of getting one tail and one head, but I don't care about the order? 50%, right? Because it's both of these end up with one heads and one tails. So let's go back to our example here, okay? These are independent events, just like two flips of a coin. So we can draw it the same way. We can say, all right, what's the odds that the industrial park gets built? Well, it's 30%. So what's the odds that we don't get an industrial park? If it's 30% chance that an industrial park is built, what's the percentage of time that an industrial park would not be built? 70%, okay? Because it has to add to 100%, yes? Yes. So if an industrial park is built, and remember it's independent, it told us that, what's the probability that a university is built? It doesn't matter. It says it's independent, just like it's a second coin flip. So what's the probability a university is built?
Oh, there should be flipped.
Oh, I see which one.
That should be 60.
Yeah, this should be 60 and 40. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. And this should be, so probably university is 30%, right? And no university is 70%. Same thing if I don't build an industrial park, the probability that I do build a university is 30%. And the probability that I don't is 70%. So we have, once again, 4 outcomes, right? 4 outcomes. What's happening here? We're building an industrial park and building a university, right? How do I find the probability of both of these things happening? 60% times 30%? It's 18%. What's the probability of building an industrial park, no university? Well, that looks like it's 60% times 70%. That's 42%, so that's in industrial park only, basically, we'll say. This is no industrial park but a university. That's 40% times 30%. That gives us 12%. That's university only. And this is neither, right? 40% times 70% is 28%. Notice if I add those up, 18, 42, 60, 72, 28, once again, they add to 100%. So I want to put in the probability of these items. So the odds that neither happens, according to this, is what? What's the odds that neither of these happen? 28%. The odds of an industrial park only looks like it's 42%. University only looks like it's what, 12%. And the odds of an industrial park and university is 18%. So what this spreadsheet is doing for me is for each of these possible decisions, it's saying take 12% times 28% plus 22 times 42%, 18 times 12%, 30 times 18%, and adding them up. That's expected value, right? For each of those things, that's the expected value or the weighted average. And then it's choosing the highest one. The highest one in this case is 260. Build a 260 room hotel. That gives me an expected value of 2,700 thousands, or what, 2.7 million. What do you think would happen? And I'm just pulling this out of the air, okay? So don't think this came from anywhere. But what if I change the probabilities to like, well, this is really damn likely. Let's make this 90%. And then let's make these, I don't know, let's say 5%, 3%, and 2%. What do you notice my decision becomes now, using that expected value approach? Now I'm going what? The highest, because it's factoring in, hey, if that's really that damn likely, yes, 90% likely, these outcomes are getting 90% of the weight, yeah? So that big number, that 65, is getting 90% of the weight. If I shifted that, if I said, hey, the probability of nothing happening is 90%, and the probability of both happening is 2%, look where it shifts my decision. Okay, so what expected value does is it weighs in both the magnitude of the payoff and the likelihood of me receiving that payoff. And I think I told you guys last class, this is very, very useful. It's used in, it's used in all kinds of decisions, in financial world, in industry, in insurance, and why if you have bad credit score, do you pay a higher interest rate on your loan? Because, well, they got you down, they're going to kick you? No, because people that have a high credit score are less likely to pay back the loan, so they have to charge you a higher interest rate to make up for it, right? For every why do you pay more insurance when you're a young driver? Because not because you're a bad driver, but because the people in your class typically are, on average, right? So it's all based on averages. Okay, that's what insurance is. Insurance and loan decisions and deal or no deal, that game show, it's all based on expected value. Okay, so that was from chapter 6. Okay, any other questions on the chapter 6 homework? Well, let's go into chapter 7. Okay, so in chapter 7, we're going to introduce the topic of forecasting. And forecasting, as you might imagine, is very useful in a lot of business contexts. If I can forecast maybe demand for my product, well, that's good. I can maybe decrease the inventory that I keep. And inventory costs me money. Maybe I can staff appropriately. I know what the demand's going to be, so I'm going to make sure I have enough people on hand to handle that demand. Okay, so forecasting our budget for the next quarter or for the next year, or how many students we're going to get at St. Francis over the next 5 years. Forecasting is very, very useful for business organizations. If you think about it, if I can look into the future, at least look in the future and kind of take away some of the murkiness, I can make better decisions. Okay, so forecasting is an integral part of almost all business enterprises. And it's really about predicting the future. Some examples: manufacturing firms forecast demand for their product to schedule manpower and raw material allocation. Service organizations forecast customer arrival patterns to make sure we have adequate customer service. Security analysts forecast revenues, earnings per share. You've ever heard, if anyone invests, you've heard, hey, they missed their forecast, or they missed their prediction, right? And then the stock goes down or it goes up. They missed their earnings forecast. Profits, debt ratios, all those good things. We also look at economic forecasts, economic indicators, like things like housing starts and how people feel about the economy, all those good things, all right? So good forecasts can lead to a lot of good things in the business world. Reduced inventory, lower overall personnel costs, and increase customer satisfaction. So we want to do good forecasting. Okay? Good forecasting leads to a lot of good things. Now, forecasting can be based on a lot of different things. One thing is an educated guess. And take the example of maybe a mom and pop store, and they've been running this store for 30 years, and they may not need to use any kind of forecasting techniques. They know, hey, it's the first Friday of the month, we're going to be busy, so they staff appropriately. where they know every month we go through this many product A or product B, okay? And it's just kind of, they kind of know. It's kind of an educated guess, right? There's also expert opinions, right? If you look at, listen to the economists, they say, hey, the likelihood that, I don't know, we're going to go into a recession over the next year is maybe 10%. These are experts, right? The likelihood that the Pirates are going to win the National League Central this year is maybe 50%. That's expert opinions, right? Those are expert opinions. The other thing that we can look at, and this is what we're going to focus on in this class, is we can look at past history values. In a lot of ways, what we've done in the past is a good predictor of what we've done, we're going to do in the future. Not always, but if you think about it, you know, I just used an example earlier about your credit score. Well, that's what it is. You know, a credit score is, well, how well have you been able to handle credit in the past? Hey, we think that's how well you're going to handle credit in the future. You know, when they make your admission decision to San Francisco University, you know, they look at your high school GPA and your SAT because they try to forecast, hey, how good of a student you're going to be, right? Your past performance is usually a good indicator of your future performance, right? So we're going to look at time series data. There's two types of data. Time series data is data gathered over time, usually depicted as a line chart, and there's also called cross-sectional data. Cross-sectional data is taken at a point in time. So if you take the timeline continuum and you say, boom, this point in time, that's cross-sectional data. We're going to be focused on time series data. Now, before we get into this process, we need to understand time series data and understand some attributes and some components that make up time series data. So the first one is time series data has a long-term trend. And a long-term trend is just that. It's looking over the long term. What is this thing doing over the long term? Over the last, I don't know, 12 months, over the last 3 years? Where is it headed? Is it headed up over the long term? Is it headed down over the long term? Or is it relatively flat? So the first thing we're going to look at is this thing stationary? And that's when we say flat, we say stationary, like it's relatively flat. Or is it exhibiting some kind of positive or negative trend? Is it going up or is it going down? Okay. Further, we can look at that trend. What kind of shape does it follow? If it's linear, remember linear is kind of like a straight line, right? Or it could also be quadratic, you know, more of a poof, or exponential, once again another poof, you know, going in exponential growth. So that is one component. We are relatively good at using long-term trend to predict future values, okay? We're relatively good at that. The second component is something known as seasonality, seasonal variation. So a lot of examples of seasonal variation. You know, it's not that time of the year, but we talk about like, you know, Black Friday. You know, retailers for sure experience, you know, seasonal variation. They staff up for what, the winter months, you know, for the time before Christmas, and then usually February is down. If you run a vacation resort in the Poconos, you know, maybe ski season's big and the hot summer months are big. Maybe you have seasonality there. Seasonality doesn't just have to be tied though to like the months of the year. It can be tied to like the days of the week. For example, you know, maybe we're busiest on Mondays, or maybe we're busiest on Fridays, or maybe there's a certain hour we're busy, like lunch hour. That's an example of seasonality as well. So any kinds of repetitive patterns that are tied to the calendar, you know, climactic changes, or maybe even behavioral changes, right? So like people's behavior. It's frequently tied to yearly cycles. You know, usually it's tied to yearly cycles. We're not so bad at handling seasonal variation because, you know, the seasons are, this was an awful winter, but the seasons are the seasons. You know, we pretty much know in Western PA in February it's going to be the coldest, right? We know that, right? We hope, you know, March is going to be milder, but, you know, we can predict those kind of things pretty damn well. So we do those okay. We handle those okay. The third one, not so much. Okay, the third one, the third component of a time series is called cyclical variation. And cyclical variation is kind of like an upturn or downturn. It's really tied, not tied to the seasons, but just tied to more of like the economy. Have you ever heard someone say that the economy is cyclical? And a lot of times if the economy's not doing well, and the guy that's the economist running, he's saying, that's not my fault, the economy's cyclical. Meaning, it goes up and it goes down. Like, we're gonna have another recession, guaranteed. We just don't know when it is, right? We have periods of growth and periods of recession. Hopefully we can expand the gap between one recession and another, right? We just had one, 2008, 2009, we had a recession. We've had a good period of growth here. Hopefully it's not, after I retire, we have another recession, but I hope, okay? But if you think about it, what happens in a recession or a depression is, hey, your business may be trending up, right? Things are going good, but now, hey, the economy tanked, and nothing beyond under your control caused that, right? And boom, your sales go way down. We can't really predict that as easily as the other thing. Economists try to predict that because it's important, but they're not as good as predicting these kind of things, right? So it's hard to predict that. We had that Elio guy in there, and he said, he owned an engineering firm. You guys know that Paul Elio with the 84 mile he said he had an engineering firm with 40 people, okay? And he said after the recession hit and the automakers in Detroit, were having all kind of issues, his firm went down to 0 people. I'm not saying he was due to bad practices on his part. It wasn't, right? He was probably trending upward. His sales every month were trending upward. His growth, his service, everything was trending upward. Boom, the economy hits. We can't really predict that, right? So this is something we're not so good at, right? We got to account. We try to account for it, but we can't do a good job of it. The next one is even worse. Okay, the next one is the next component of a time series is called random effects. Okay, random effects is the example I like to use is, have you ever been in like a part of a bus trip and you have 2 or 3 buses and you pull into a Wendy's and they usually have maybe 5 people every 10 minutes coming there, and all of a sudden they have 300 people. Like, what the hell? You couldn't have predicted that, right? They didn't know that your bus was going to come into their Wendy's on that day. Yes, that's just random effects. Okay, just random effects that happens. Good example, and Eric will appreciate this. 2 years ago, accounting is our biggest major in the School of Business St. Francis. We usually get about 8 or 9 accounting majors every year as first-time incoming freshmen. 2 years ago, we had 0. So, as the chair of the program, people are like, what the hell is wrong with accounting? Nothing's wrong with accounting. It's just a random effect. Next year it went up to 8 or 9, right? It just happens, right? It just happens because of the randomness of the data, okay? So we weren't teaching things worse, nothing like that. Accounting wasn't a bad discipline, it just happens, okay? It just happens. So random effects. So if we want to visualize that, okay, this is what we're going to do. So if we have a stationary time series, okay, we talk about long-term trend. This is a stationary time series. And you might say, well, why are you calling that a stationary time series when I see it going up and I see it going down, and it's going up and forth? It is, but over the long term, it's not heading one way. Okay, it's kind of oscillating as around the stationary line, yes? Okay. So if we identify something as stationary like this, what we're going to do is we're going to forecast this value, right? We're going to forecast one value for the next month or week or year. And if that's our forecast, if we're saying this thing is truly stationary, that's going to be our forecast for the next month, the month after that, the month after that, the month after that. We may also have time series that have trend, okay? This one has a positive trend. It's going up and it's going down, but over the long haul, clearly it's trending upwards, right? Whatever this thing is, profit or sales, workplace accidents, it's trending upward. Yes, it's trending upward. So when we predict this, we can't just predict one value and say this is the value forever and ever. We have to recognize that there's some kind of trend there, and our prediction has to account for that trend. So for next month, it might be here. The next month we are predicting here. The next month we're predicting here. Okay. The next one is an example of linear trends. So this thing is definitely headed upwards, but it has seasonality. How can I see the seasonality here? How can I observe the seasonality in this time series? Where do I observe the time series, the seasonality in this time series? You see it anywhere? how do I know this thing has seasonality? Seasonality is what?
It's like spikes in your.
Yeah, it's spikes and it's valleys, right? It's patterns that occur over and over again. So, I don't know, maybe this is February, right? And maybe this is a spike for, I don't know, maybe we're a summer retreat. And this is summer, our summer months, yes? Maybe this is, now we're back here in September, October, November, and this is January, now we're peaking back up in the summer. So this thing is definitely trending upward, and it has seasonality. So when we predict this, man, we're gonna have to predict the trend and the seasonality, right? So what we have to do, right? So what we're gonna have to do is first and foremost, I'm walking through the steps, then we're gonna take, we'll take a little break. We're going to walk you through the steps, and then after the break, we're going to do it. And I'll give you a little example for it. The first thing we need to do is look at our historical data. Look at our time series data. And then it says, hypothesize a form. So when it says hypothesize a form, we want to say, hey, is this thing stationary? Or is it trending upward or downward? So we need to look at our past practices and see, are they stationary or is it trending upward or downward? And the reason we do that is because there's different forecasting models we can use depending on the type of time series we have. If it's something stationary, there's a handful of models that we'll use. If it's something that is trending upward or trending downward, there's a handful of models that we use. So once we have a form for the time series model, we're going to select a forecasting technique, and I'm going to teach you these after the break. Then we're going to prepare a forecast, and then we're going to go over the results, okay? So what I'd like you to do, it's actually, we made great progress today, so it's a little ahead of time, but I'm ready for a break. What I would like you to do is, in your book on page 393, there is a little case for Yo-Ho brand yo-yos. Apparently, we make yo-yos. And we're trying to predict demand for our yo-yo product. And we have 52 weeks worth of data, and we're trying to predict demand for the 53rd week. So I just want you to take 15 minutes, read that case, and take your break. We'll come back a little bit after 7 o'clock.
Page is that on?
393. Mustangs are winning, Adam. 21-10. Yeah. So going to the state championship.
Saw the Hoodax
What's that?
after the fact the other night.
Oh, he's living on cloud nine, yeah.
Yeah, it's cool early and everything.
Yeah, my two older boys are on the fan bus. Because it's Hawaiian Day, so they're dressed with my dad's Hawaiian shirts on, or Beach Day, I think it is.